Apologies for my voice. I'm using some innovative medicine, but it works only after 48 hours. When discussing innovation, it can be fun indeed, but there is an elephant in the room, which people never address fully. They hint at it, as previous speakers also rightly did. And that elephant is called government systems. It's often overlooked that if your economy and your society are undergoing a paradigm shift, you cannot expect government systems not to move into a new paradigm shift too. Otherwise, you get indeed all the problems which we see in Europe. We pay not enough attention to the system of governance, both in the European Union and at national levels. And I like to show quickly why this is so important. In the independent tripartite group on innovation policy management, we saw this ecosystem of policies interacting with each other in order to facilitate the framework conditions for entrepreneurs to actually innovate, in order to create better conditions for innovation as we see them in other parts of the world, like be it Israel or the US. But now look, this is the governance system of the European Union. It is in itself in contradiction with this. This is a government system which was once the most innovative in the world and which has delivered great benefits to Europe. But it was not designed to manage an innovation ecosystem. And this discussion is only just starting. The problem in Europe is not at all a lack of capabilities. When you talk to leading officials in the Commission or members of Parliament or of government, they see what has to be done. But they probably do not yet see how to do it. And that is a real serious weakness for us Europeans. And we should not blame EU institutions or governments. We should look at the underlying system within which these people have to work. I sometimes like to compare the European Union to the Bentley Touring Continental, one of the most beautiful cars ever designed in the 1950s. And you can restore it and drive with it very comfortably. Just as in the European Union, you can restore by having better regulation and everything else, but you're still driving in an old-timer. You're not driving a new government system. So the panelists, which I'm going to ask to introduce themselves, and I apologize, but my voice has another minute and then it's gone. The panelists will look at this issue from each of their own perspective. But I already know the conclusion. We do need in Europe to pay more attention to governance system innovation. And we really need a platform whereby we bring together stakeholders, be they from the EU institutions, from governments, and very important, regions and cities. Everyone always says they are so innovative, but where are they? They are not there. They are somewhere outside. And this is a discussion we need to have. And the good news to conclude is that within the confines of the European treaties, which everyone says are so difficult to change, and I believe that, within the confines of the treaties, there is a lot of space for governance innovation. And you see the new Commission seeking that space, step by step. But there needs to be much more attention from business and academia to governance system innovation in Europe to make possible everything else what previously was asked for. You will not hear me further saying much. I'd now like to ask the panelists, perhaps starting with ladies first. I'm a bit old-fashioned, I'm sorry. With introducing briefly yourself and then quickly discussing the topic, using your experiences, using your perspective, but also looking at the big elephant in the room.
Thank you. I'm Tuula, Antola, Director for Economic and Business Development of the City of Espoo, but actually I consider more myself as an innovation activist and as an innovation gardener of this community, because that's how I see what we should do and how we should eat this elephant. I think that us, the public authorities, we should see ourselves more like moderators or facilitators or orchestrators on innovation, as if even the word innovation should be said anymore, as Miki Kuusi just mentioned, that no one in startup community is talking about innovations, but instead they are talking about experiences. And experiences is already so much closer to people, to the Europeans. Innovation is more about the systems, or maybe something between could be innovativeness, how to enhance and foster the innovativeness of people. And in my short presentation, I will also talk a bit about from the point of entrepreneurs view. You want this? Yeah, or may I? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's see how this works. No? Okay, this way. Okay, I was asking from myself that what my Europe means to me, if any. And the next question, what I ask from myself, is what is my city? And this gave me already much more answers what my city means. But especially about my neighborhood, I could give you already many words. And that's already in our city. It's not only the city of Espoo what we are developing, but we are developing the neighborhoods of the people. That's where they are from. And that was the question we asked from our residents when we started to build our new city strategy. What is your neighborhood like at the moment? How you would like to be it in the future? What are you dreaming about? So it was a crowdsourced process itself, and we received around 20,000 ideas and feedback lines from our residents. A story what they told for us was a story about the families, story about education, story about jobs and talent. In our case, especially jobs for talented people, because we do have more than 50% of our residents with the university level degree. They also told about experiences, what they really love, related to culture, related to hobbies of the children, and also about sports, communities around the sports, and about the nature, how a big value they gave about for the nature in their neighborhood. So something that is there always around you, and as many of you visited yesterday evening Nuuksio, our national park, you noticed that you can really breathe the air of wilderness there, very close to our capital city. So I think these are the key values and guidelines that were given to our, by our residents, and as an advice how we should orchestrate the innovation ecosystem and what kind of governance we should have to enable these elements. And safety, definitely, it's one very important element in whole Europe. And even in Finland, where the small school kids still are able to walk to the school. So how are we able to maintain the safety of the neighborhood? And I could call it also as a wonderful platform for innovations for the future. Our answer to these wants and needs and dreams and hopes was building on this West Metro growth corridor or collaboration corridor. And within this corridor, we want to enable both innovation, business, culture, sports and nature to be in the neighborhood of all of our people. And the government is just something that enables this development. That's how I think. And probably you have seen this this symbol in many places already, and it's not a logo of the city, but it's a symbol of the community. And that was a step which we took maybe a year ago, that we created this symbol and shared it in a very open way with the community. Asked the small companies, corporations, research institutes, resident communities, all the people to use this symbol in the best way they think. Because we as city servants, we don't know what they are especially proud of, what kind of things they want to share with the community. And from the city government point of view, what we really want to do is to enable the growth of the innovation clusters in this area. And when I'm talking about the area, I don't mean only Espoo, but of course the metropolitan area and other innovative, together in other innovative regions in Europe. And enabling the growth of startups and clusters, often it means, for example, co-working spaces. And I think that's an important role for government also, to somehow enable these co-working spaces, which are not developed for some silo, just some group of people, but as an open platforms for innovation. And I picked these lines from the high-level group on innovation policy management, which is, I think, a really important message for all of us. Go beyond updated bureaucratic procedures and develop new forms of collaborative governance in line with requirements of open innovation. I think this collaborative governance is something that could be worth a conference itself. So maybe we'll meet in the collaborative governance conference next time. And I'll finalize with a real-life example on this innovation journey we are on within our city. And we gave 1 hour real-life challenges to the product development project team of the Aalto University. And that's a course which combines business design and engineering. And our task for them was to design something which gives the end users of the West Metro a promise of innovation when they enter the Aalto University metro station. That was a very open question. We said that create something. If it will be good, we will consider it. If it's something wow and excellent, we will scale it up to all the 13 new metro stations, and after that the rest of the Europe and globe will want it. We gave a small amount of money there, but we gave quite a lot of time, my time and the managing director of West Metro company time, and for sparring these students. but the result, the outcome was something wonderful. So they designed for us the virtual art gallery, where you can. There's our mayor, and he's visiting the virtual art gallery. So there's an mobile application, and when you look through this mobile application, some places there, some spots there in the metro station or wherever, you can watch videos, you can visit art galleries, or the imagination is a limit what you can do with this extended reality kind of innovation. And could we have 1 minute video, please? Wonderful, wasn't it? Yes, so we invested 15,000 euros for this project, and now this is an open call to the rest of the Europe, and I know that there's also representatives from Japan and from China and other countries. Let's utilize this wonderful, brilliant innovation of this group of students from 8 different countries, from 4 different continents, who all are studying here at the university. So I think that's the crucial point for the government, how to develop further and scale up these innovations. So, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and inspiring work for a future platform or whatever on governance system innovation. Jesse, may I ask you to connect now to this and try to respect people's lunchtime break?
Yes, I'll do my best. I promise I'll be far more boring than Tuula, which may move us towards the break more quickly. And talk about something completely different, which is, I think, one of the biggest exercises, perhaps, in innovation governance and innovation of governance that's going on now in Europe, which is called smart specialization. As was said earlier this morning, regional policy was mostly about building roads and bridges. It was money mainly sent to the poorer countries to catch up. But look what happened. Look what's happening. The amount of money that is being spent on research and development and innovation has skyrocketed in the last programming period. And this is a different kind of spending money on research and development and innovation, because we're talking about regional policy people who really think this is going to contribute to the well-being of their people. It's not people who have a vested interest anyway to support research and development and innovation. But there's a little problem here. If you design a program like Horizon 2020, you have one program to design, and you can tell people what to do in a very articulated way. You know which stakeholders to engage, and so on and so forth. And I personally think the Commission does a pretty good job at that. If you want to coordinate what regions are doing, you have to talk to 271. Actually, I looked on the internet, and it's 276 now. The number goes up and down according to what countries do to their regional clusters or whatever. You have to coordinate 276 separate research and development policies. And what people were doing until the last round was sort of to tell regions what to do, to give a sort of generic blueprint, kind of like you do for Horizon 2020. But to be honest, for all the money spent, and on the slide before that, it was calculated at 86 billion euro, which is more than the whole framework program, we weren't getting great results. And the regional governments are aware of when you're not getting great results. And among other things, the private sector was getting totally confused. What do you do if you want to invest in research in Europe and you have 271 regions to talk to, plus the regions, go out and discover become translocal, linked to one another, and what scale do they do that at? And finally, I think the last thing is that if we are to think about a triple, quadruple helix, what we need to think about is, what do the people do? What do they say to each other? If people are in there with a specific role representing industry or citizens or whatever, what is it that they have to say to the others? This is just the first sketch, and I think we have to think more. So some lessons for the question of innovation governance, which is an emerging science, I think. I think the question of discovery is central. One of the main purposes of governance has to be a continuous discovery of what is in the territory, whatever it is you're governing. Bottom-up alignment. Policy coherence happens much better bottom-up than top-down, because it's on the bottom where all of the things come together. So there the question is, how can we let it happen? How can we make regulations, not for specific programs, but imagine somebody trying to put programs together according to their own logic. Territorial innovation. A lot of talk about creativity, not much talk about creativity in place. Different types of creativity, different models of innovation. Maybe somebody in Poland wants to innovate differently than somebody in Helsinki or somebody in Sicily, which is where I live. And innovation capacity. How can we make governments, local governments, like we've seen at Espoo, have the capacity to innovate themselves and to co-innovate together with the stakeholders in the territory? And finally, the question is policy learning and experimentation, but I think that has been discussed already enough. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Would you like to follow up on this?
Sure, absolutely. Hi. Good afternoon, is it right? My name is Raphaël. I think I'm going to describe myself in three different ways. The first one is I'm a Euro believer. The second one is I was a corporate man, and the third one, I am a disruptor activist. So the first thing, and I'd like to thank Tuula for actually mentioning startup today, because this is the first, a little bit after what Miki said here earlier, it's the first time I see the word on the slide. So how many of you, and I want to see some hands raised right now, how many of you consider themselves entrepreneurs? That is impressive. All right, good. How many of you have actually created a company? I wish I could differentiate those two. All right, that is actually a very large number, and I'm glad to see this. The reason I'm saying it is most of the time when we work with the European Commission and some of those initiatives, the average number of entrepreneurs and people that understand what a startup or a small company is about with its challenges is down to 10% maximum. And this is actually close to 50 now, so congratulations. I'm really glad to see that innovation is driving the agenda here. I'm a Euro believer. Back in '92, I created a publication called À l'heure de l'Europe, being French, which was one of the first European magazines trying to push the message from young Europeans on how we could bridge the gap between the different countries and make them work around small ideas and disruption, which was very early. I was a corporate man. I've spent 15 years in Apple trying to push European boundaries as well with a big American company. Not always easy, but extremely interesting. And I'm now big time a disruptor believer and pusher, because I'm the founder and managing director of Startupbootcamps, who is one of the biggest accelerators in the world and who's definitely the biggest in Europe. And so what we do is we help young companies get to market by helping them bridge the gap between what it is to find great corporate support and having funding from what Miki mentioned about the VC world out there. One of the things I wanted to raise today and talk about was one of the things that I'm confronted constantly on the work that we do with the European Commission. I forgot to mention I'm also a founding board member of the Alliance for IoTi, which is something that most of you I'm sure know about. A couple of my fellow colleagues are in the assembly here. We are trying to again help drive the agenda around 2020 projects to give right recommendation to both the European Commission but also corporate partners in getting the right level of support that we need to make sure Europe is the best at what we do in IoT in the world. This is major transformation and obviously at the core of innovation. So one of the things that we see is that small companies have a constant struggle between what's written in the paper, what the average a will to help is and what the reality on the market is, really. So there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of, both commissioners, parliaments, and supporters are trying to help. At the end of the day, we tend to see that small companies get constantly blocked by the sheer size of the challenge they face when it comes to getting support from those different agencies. So, we're talking a lot about innovations, we talked a lot about ecosystem, we're talking a lot about startup supports and everything, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we can help those guys getting closer to that innovation and getting accesses to both supporters in the commissions in the various countries, but also funding. And it is sometimes difficult because, yes, there is, at the core of what we do, governance to help drive a right agenda, but the governance doesn't necessarily work with entrepreneurship. So one of the questions I'm raising now, and we can talk about this, I'm sure, in the panel, is how do we bridge that gap?
Thank you very much. Would you like to continue with your experience?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kumardev Chatterjee. I'm the founder and president of the European Young Innovators Forum, which is the largest network of young innovators. And I'm the first Young Innovation Luminary Awardee. Today, of course, there will be somebody else this evening who will take on that battle. So I just want to share a couple of things with you. I mean, to me, open innovation, and Björn and I have long discussions on this, is not really about opening up from research to more innovation in an open way. I think that's one description of it. Open innovation is about results and is about how the community is moving forward. So a good example of that is the sharing economy. There are currently about 17 $1 billion companies in the sharing economy, employing in excess of 60,000 people, with excess of 15 billion euros in revenue. How many of them do you think are in Europe? Or were created or founded in Europe? Just one. Just one. It's called TransferWise for sharing money, and you could challenge whether that's really sharing economy or not. So that is the reality. It's good to start with theory, but let's start with the data, I think. That gives you a more reality of where we are. So the question really is how do you change the governance model to get from the point where we are today, which is pretty bad, globally, because 16 others are not only in the US, there's a good 5 of them in Asia, in Japan, Singapore, China. So it's not just the old US versus Europe story. We are losing out to many other areas of the world. So the question is really how do you rethink the way you do governance? And I don't believe that the way to rethink that is to go the incremental, we were centralizing, so now let's decentralize. The opposite of centralization is not decentralization when it comes to governance. Open governance means involving the stakeholders that are really involved in innovating, which is the community and the citizen creator. So it's more about how do you go away from a model of governance where you are creating a theme top-down to a governance where the people who are actually innovating are involved, number one. Number two, smart specialization and the other theories around how we will make the next change are interesting theories. But if you look back at the cluster theory that has dominated the last 30 years, the pole, the competitivity and all of that, how many world-beating billion-dollar companies came out of Europe from that? You can count them on less than one hand, I can tell you that. So this idea that just by clustering or by focusing on what you're good at locally, you will be even better at what locally, it doesn't work. The real currency of innovation is talent and money. Talent is young people and others with ideas who are moving around. So it doesn't matter if you're Espoo or if you're Warsaw or if you're somewhere in Malta. If there's somebody with an idea and he can move and he can settle somewhere and use the policies and the frameworks available there to go ahead, he will. I'm setting up my 5th company now, and I chose again London rather than Belgium where I live. Why? Simply because the governance models in Belgium are awful when it comes to new companies. And I'm not talking about an entrepreneur, it's more about innovation area. So I think we need to move away from some of the existing ideas and theories that are today 20 to 30 years old around how governance should be done around innovation and look at where we need to go in the future. That's about disruption and letting go. If we can't let go, we will not reform the way we work and we will not create new innovative companies coming out of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have the last word.
Okay.
Well, I have, but you have the pre-last.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. My name is Jari Romanainen. I come from TEKES, the Finnish funding agent for innovation. I've been involved in innovation, research and innovation policy and policy design, from sort of implementation to policy design to evaluation for more than 20 years now. And for the last, let's say 7 years, I've been involved in policies related to the startup ecosystem, what kinds of policy measures and how to develop those kinds of things, and in addition to some other things as well. About the governance challenge, let's see how this goes forward. Okay. I think these are more or less known to all of us, is that basically what you referred to as we're still dealing with governance and policy that are mainly based on corporate model adopted during the industrial age. So we still see the role of the government as a regulator and producer of public good. We still focus a lot on the efficiency rather than effectiveness. And of course, then there is an additional thing that if we look at any regional government or national government, we see that immediately that we're increasingly in a situation where we have a multi-level governance. Because I have the local, regional, national, and then we have the European level. And in addition then, and another dimension, we have different policy domains. So how do we then build the governance in this kind of a structure, which is very fragmented and multi-layered, which is a bit of a challenge, especially now we're still thinking in terms of industrial age, corporate type of approach. The second point to understand really is that government is not about one opinion and one voice. If you look at the internal structures of government, you see that there are actually, it's like a system of small kingdoms continually competing with each other, whether that's a political system or whether that's a sort of a civil servant of the government system. So it's a culture of political compromises. There's a lot of thinking about us against the others. You see that very clearly when you look at the discussion about European policies. It's about all the time thinking about what would be the solution that would be the most benefit, bring most benefits to us, rather than on the European level as a whole. And that comes back to one of the major points that I'd like to raise about governance of these kinds of systems, and it's about understanding the incentive structures. What I mean by incentive structures is that when you're dealing with a system where you have multiple stakeholders and different types of actors, it's very important to understand what is the motivations and drivers of all of these different actors, and then think about how can you introduce different kinds of incentives or disincentives through policies in order to help them find each other and create the collaborative environment. So I think this is very much a challenge to policymakers to try and understand this bigger picture. And also there's the political time frame. Many of these things require a long period of time. They don't happen overnight. And typically in a government context, it takes about a year and a half to get anything started, make the decisions, get anything started, and there is another delay because once you get something started, before the actors actually start doing anything, that takes a while. And that means that it usually is that who reaps the benefits from a political decision, which is a good one, is the next government, not this one. So for political decision making, it's much easier to make a political decision that yields results in 1 or 2 years rather than starting to change the system, which will eventually bring results in a long period of time. Thinking about this open innovation, we are faced with the kind of what I would call systemic innovation. And I think this is something that we're really struggling with in terms of policies. And this is very clear when you look at the European level, Horizon 2020, particularly the third pillar of societal challenges. How do we address societal challenges? I think that one way of sort of bringing some more understanding about it is to structure the levels in which we need to innovate. And what I've structured here is the physical infrastructures, virtual infrastructures, products and services. And this means that in many cases there's a lot of institutional inertia. So inability to chase the physical or some parts of the virtual infrastructure, which means that we're limited in our activities, that what we can do is we can innovate in products and services. But we don't get into systemic innovation unless we are able to go and change the underlying infrastructures, physical or virtual ones. Take an example of smart cities. We can develop a lot of individual products or individual services that are sort of moving towards the innovative cities, so smart cities, but unless we start really embedding the innovation, taking the innovation at the level of the physical infrastructure and how those are developed, and also the virtual infrastructures like an internet of a city or transport systems, we are very much limited in our capability of doing anything innovative if it remains at the level of products and services. And when we talk about virtual infrastructures, we talk about something like sort of industrial internet would be one, whatever the physical virtual infrastructures that we need in terms of developing Internet of Things, or let's say in healthcare, we have the healthcare data is one very challenging thing because it's very, very fragmented in very different kinds of systems. If we can pull that together, we create a virtual infrastructure which could actually lead into very interesting things. Now we're very limited. The products that come that utilize this health data are very isolated. They don't really communicate with anything else. So we're seeing the kind of first interesting things coming out of there, but we're very far from the systemic level of innovation in those kinds of things. To save some time. So how do we then address these governance challenges? First of all, I think you've talked about experimentation already, but I'd like to go a little bit deeper into experimentation. And there are two types of approaches to experimentation. First, that we need to focus on real-life challenges and real-life problems. And engagement and leadership of the problem owners. We've seen many examples where companies try to develop something to solve a problem of the public sector. It doesn't work unless the public sector is really involved in the process and preferably have take the leadership. And that's what we have a huge potential in Europe in the form of public procurement. If we do that wisely, that can create a lot of room for and demand for innovation. We haven't really tapped into that resource, really. Only very isolated small cases up until now. Learning by doing has been, I think, referred already. But I think the point is that not only that we are limited learning within the experiment, but actually we think about scaling up the good experiments already before we start the first smaller experiment. By bringing in the future adopters into the process of learning how it happens throughout the process. Of course, we need to have an in-depth understanding of the challenges and what to what extent they are society-specific and to what extent generic. Because often enough, we see good examples, then people go there and look and try to learn from it, and too many times we try to copy that. It doesn't work, because there are certain characteristics that are very society-specific and certain characteristics that can be copied. And understanding that is very important. And if we think about this experimentation, I think one of the sort of the main core point is that we need to, besides doing that in real life context, we need to do that in large scale. Because otherwise, if we do that only in small scale, we only get access to a limited number of users. And typically, depending on how we design that, we get a very selective, biased representation of the society into those experiments, which means that it doesn't tell the real story. So we need to extend this experimentation to a large scale. And this is quite challenging. But this needs to be done in a large scale in order to facilitate that we really know what happens. And doing it in a large enough scale allows us to really have the possibility to dig in deep into the institutional structures. The second point about experimentation, you can do it also in small scale, but you should have a purpose for doing that in small scale. Because what we've seen is hundreds and thousands of small-scale experiments going on all around Europe, and very, very few of them actually get adopted by anybody else. That is because it's very limited, it's ad hoc, and again, It's limited partly because there are existing framework conditions, regulatory structures, there are existing infrastructures, institutional inertia, which means that however innovative you want to be, you have to limit eventually your experiment to what is possible. So we don't really support the experimentation in that level. So yeah, this is my last one. So we need to sort of facilitate bottom-up experimentation based in voluntary action with a strong involvement of problem owners and users, and to allow, through policies, to open the space and time beyond existing regulations, practices, and institutional structures. This is interesting because if you look at what's happened in the universities in terms of commercialization, in most of the universities, the commercialization activities have been built on top of the university core structure. The core structure of the university, education, research, remains exactly the same as it was 50 or 100 years ago. So it hasn't really penetrated to that. It's starting to gradually do that. But at first level, it is about putting some kind of structures in there, some kind of objectives like technology transfer offices or something like that, commercialization, something like that. Then the second level is that companies can become interested more and more about that. Finally, the next level is that when we get students interested in that thing. And now we're at the level in many universities where student communities are becoming more and more interested in that. And that gradually is going to start changing the culture, which is very important. And about change agents is that through these small experiments, what you're trying to create is change agents, showing through example that change is possible. And these change agents are many times startups or spin-offs. Their role is very important. They could also be social enterprises, so social innovation. It's very important in that respect. But also, we should allow entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship also in the public sector. And one example would be creating virtual agencies to implement certain kinds of changes rather than relying on the existing rather rigid public sector structures. So those are the ones that I had in mind to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have unfortunately come at the end of this session, although these people had a lot more to tell us. Now, that last presentation and the previous ones are in fact already the work program for something like a platform on governance innovation, which I hope the Commission will stimulate. Now, the key message which the high-level group on innovation policy management got from the former president of the European Council, Herman van Rompuy, was this: you have to go one step too far. And by doing that, we can follow a little bit. And this is, I think, the way we will have to work in the complexity of the European Union and its 28 member states and its institutions. Bold thinking, radical thinking about governance innovation, but at the same time taking account of the political and legal realities and see how this bold, radical thinking can move step by step forward in a change process. Thank you all very much, and I wish you a good lunch. Sorry.